was reading one of your recent articles in the Tribune, and in that you quoted and you cited a report by an international panel of agriculture experts and food experts, and you warned that we are either heading or actually we are going through a global food crisis. I know it's a very broad and vast topic, and I would love for you to go into some detail. But can you tell us what is the food crisis and how did we get here?
Well, I think, as we all know, the last food crisis or the major food crisis the world had witnessed was in 2007-8. And that was a time when the food prices had skyrocketed. And obviously, that means food had gone out of the reach of several million or several hundred million people, as a result of which there were food riots in 37 countries. And speculation had driven the prices up. And of course, the agribusiness companies had gained because of the food crisis. And then eventually, when everything settled down, we witnessed that for last 15 years at least, another event that could be called as a food crisis happened in 2011, when you remember the African, especially in Egypt and so on, that crisis erupted. I'm forgetting the name. And then, of course, this particular year, even before the month of March, when the war began in Russia-Ukraine region, prior to that, food prices had spiraled and had crossed that level of 2007, 2008. So, which means in these 15 years, we were already into a food crisis, and the war had further added on to it. So this is what you mean by when you say that there is a food crisis happening in the world. And as that IPES report had very clearly brought out, this third crisis happening in the 15-year period, I think tells you a lot that we haven't learned any lesson from the first world food crisis or the major food crisis that the world witnessed in recent history. So I think that is a very worrisome picture, because FAO has predicted that 49 million people in 43 countries are almost a step away from starvation and famine. So I think the world, at a time when it is already slush with food supplies, and yet there are people living in hunger, I think is a very, very difficult situation. And I think we need to all focus our energies to see that we don't have that crisis again.
You mentioned very briefly, sir, speculation and trading. It like we all know, like we hear that term sometimes, that these giant food agribusiness companies that are they're captured not just like the trading, but distribution, marketing, every aspect of the market they have controlled. What exactly, how do they do this speculation, and how what kind of how are we so unable to stop it?
Well, over the years, what is happening is there is a consolidation, mergers, and so on. Yeah. As a result of which companies are, becoming monolithic, or they are becoming one, and as a result of which, the power and control goes into the hands of big players. Now, this is what allows these companies to play around with prices. So they form a cartel, and then when they are trading, they are into commodity trading. Then you see that there is a kind of a pattern that we see very clearly. The prices are going up, and obviously because there are few players and they know how to operate. This is like the stock market, in the financial markets that operates. So in the commodity trading, this is how it figures out. And then what happens is we have also seen in the last few months or years, what is happening is that during the pandemic period, when we say that inflation is going up, the interesting part is that most of the companies we have seen, their profits are going up, farmers' income is going down, and they are giving more bonus and perks to their CEOs and to the top management, and then passing it off to the consumer. Oh, sorry, we can't do anything. It is the is inflation that you have to live with it. So this is something which is happening predominantly in United States and also in other countries. Let me illustrate the livestock sector. The US President Joe Biden himself has gone on record calling it a predatory pricing mechanism. 4 companies control 85% of the livestock market in America, and these 4 companies have gained phenomenally, whereas the farmers' income has gone down in the livestock sector. I'm talking of beef and sheep and so on, and chicken included. And interestingly, their perks and bonuses to their CEOs have risen, and then also they are into buybacks of stocks in the financial market because they get all the tax concession which they use for this mechanism. Instead of creating jobs or instead of making it cheaper, they produce. They are into stock buybacks and so on. And this is a phenomena which is being talked about, but somehow markets haven't done anything or haven't done justice to it, and we continue to live with that strange phenomena.
It's a very strange situation because on the surface, one would imagine that if the prices of agricultural commodities are rising, the people who grow those commodities, one might expect them to actually get better prices. But is that like, are farmers actually able to benefit from the rise in prices of agricultural commodities?
Not really so. There may be examples here and there, but if you see a general pattern, it is always the trade which walks away with the large share of the profits. And then, of course, the argument is that let the markets operate. But I think as you rightly said, when the markets are operating quote unquote efficiently or are doing a better job, as they say, then I thought the benefit should be percolating also to the primary producer who is a farmer in this particular case. Yeah. But we haven't seen, the primary producer gaining anywhere in the world. I think that is what is at least something that I am for last several years or let's say a decade or more have been talking about, how to provide farmers with a living income, how to ensure that the farmers at least the basic income pattern which covers his cost of production and also provides him a little bit of a profit is ensured. Why I am saying this is because let's say you look at any industrial product that you can think of, whether it is a medicine or it is a pharmaceutical product or it is let's say even your pen or a ball pen or whatever, or an automobile or you buying a car, everything comes with a price tag. Just see around, everything comes with a price tag. In the market, it is not the markets which decides the prices of, let's say, the number of cars or the different brands of cars. The companies already give a price tag and then they enter the market. Why is it that the agriculture sector is the only sector where farmers have no control, or the produce comes in the market without a price tag? Then the markets decides the price, as a result of which we have seen farmers being exploited ruthlessly by the markets over the decades, not only in India, but everywhere in the world. And that is a problem that the world has failed to address. They think that the best way to do is to let more markets or more free operations of markets be in place, and that they think would drive the prices up or give a better price to farmers. But it hasn't happened. You may have 1 or 2 or 3 examples, but in a sector which is of course 50%, roughly 50% of the population, I think if this kind of fate or economic system the farmer is pitted against, I think you can understand why the global farm crisis and why agrarian distress is blowing over in every part of the world. When we all believe that the markets are a better judge or would provide farmers a better price, and the government has to step out of the entire marketing, agriculture marketing, and that is why in India also, as you know, after the protest or during the protest, the farmers' protest that lasted for a year. We have seen the debate polarized in the sense that there were economists who were saying, "Oh, market should derive the prices. We should not be having MSP, minimum support price, and so on, and blah blah blah." We all know that controversy. But interestingly, let me give you a couple of examples which illustrate that how the markets have ruthlessly been exploiting farmers. I gave you a couple of examples where there is no MSP, there is no mandi or APMC markets, and yet let's see, and we have all the big players operating in that particular sector. Let me give you two examples here. The chocolate. I read a report which was very shocking. It tells me that when you next time go and buy a bar of chocolate, roughly the price you're going to pay is 100 rupees plus. And you'll be surprised that the income of a cocoa grower, cocoa is that bean from which we process and make chocolate, and this is a $200 billion industry, chocolate industry, out of the global confectionery industry, which is dominantly the space is occupied by chocolate industry. $200 billion, and majority farmers do not even get 100 rupees or the amount you pay for a chocolate bar per day. Now that tells you, there are big giants in this industry operating, and yet look at what has happened to the small farmers. So this is how the markets exploit. And then look at the coffee industry. Coffee industry, of course, again, we all love coffee. Morning, many people wake up to a cup of coffee. But look at the coffee growers also. A study done by one of the universities in America, they had said that if you look at the coffee beans producers, 50-60 lakh coffee bean producers, mostly in the Latin American countries, majority is getting less than the acute poverty, or live below the acute poverty line, which is $1.9 a day. Whereas again, coffee is a $200 billion plus industry. And there are big giants operating. There is commodity trading happening. And yet, this is how it is, in both these sectors, and the farmers are not at an advantage. Now, look at bananas. Banana is the cheapest fruit which comes in Europe and America, and much of it is coming or imported from Latin American countries, Ecuador, and so on. And interestingly, again, if you look at it, if you look at a supply chain, what the farmer earns from the end consumer price, if I work it out, let's say somebody is buying bananas for €1 or $1, what the farmer gets is just 5% to 9% of the end consumer price. So imagine these three big commodities that I talked about, and this is what is happening globally. And I'm sure, Kshitij, you will agree with me that if in a chocolate case, or in the case of coffee, or in the case of bananas, or similar other cases, if we have had a minimum support price being given to those farmers, I'm sure you will agree, those farmers who would have been much, much better off to what they are today. I think that is where markets have actually failed to deliver the benefit to the farmers.
The pressure from big business and corporations and international agencies, World Bank, WTO, and everything for the last 30 odd years is to dismantle and undermine all the old green revolution institutions we had, price support, credit support, subsidy support, input subsidy support, and all that stuff. And in a way, the farmers' movement since that time has sort of been fighting a defensive fight to hold on to these institutions that we had, restore them, re-strengthen them. And I wonder sometimes that and obviously that is extremely important. I wonder sometimes that in parallel to that defensive fight, should we also, try to talk about new institutions that we would want to create? Like if we, the question basically that I'm asking you is that if you want to envision the future of Indian agriculture, how would you see it? What sort of institutions which we want them to be very inclusive, and we want them to deal with, climate change and all that stuff? What sort of vision do you have for the future of Indian agriculture?
I think there's no denying, first of all, that over the last few decades, or I would say a better part of the past 1 century, farmers have or their income has been constantly on the decline, and this is happening in almost all the countries that we know of. And this is how the markets have actually sucked income from the bottom to the top. This is what I've always been saying very cleverly. The farmers, let's not miss out on this point, that the farmers actually produce economic wealth. The entire economy is somehow based on that raw material that the farmers produce.
Yes.
Farmers are also, as we all know, the cheapest farm labor. Or, we want to move people out of agriculture into the cities because we believe that the cities need cheap labor, and that will come from agriculture. So this task has been enshrined to agriculture. So it has to basically keep the farm or the economic reforms viable, and also to ensure that the industries remain viable, or quote unquote competitive, as they say. Now, interesting part is, while all this was happening, farmers across the world were protesting. But somehow the people in the cities, because of the disconnect we have with the villages, we do not even understand as to how the farming sector operates, why the farmer is in a distress, why is it that the farmers are committing suicide, and so on and so forth, despite numerous reports and headlines and so on happening. Now this is because the economic thinking, especially after the new liberal economics came in, is completely enshrined in, as I said earlier, letting markets play, and the government withdrawing, and dismantling the structures, as you rightly mentioned, which had been laid out to become food secure at some stage or the other. Most countries have become food secure because of those structures being in place. Now, interestingly, I've seen 150 years of, when I say I have been seeing, I've seen the reports which say that the American Civil War happened in the 19th century. And since then, we have seen the price that, let's say, for an example, wheat price. The wheat price the farmer would get at the time, or let's say 1865 or so. And now, it has come down drastically. It has come down drastically. Look at Canada again, 6 times fall we have seen in the wheat price happening between 150 years, and this has gone on and on. Now what happens is food prices are, as I said, falling, as a result of which we also want to ensure that food inflation doesn't go up. So actually this is part of an economic design. Now, I think it is very important for people to understand how the economic design operates. Why is it that the farmer who puts in so much of effort and puts in his labor, family labor, and so on, produces a record crop or a bumper crop, and yet when he goes to the market, the prices crash, and often we have seen reports, farmers throwing tomato on the streets or potato on the streets, and so on. Look at how much not only the hurt, but what kind of a distress that livelihood must have been hit with, when somebody has to, after 3 months or 4 months of the vegetable crop, has to suffer that fate. Now, it tells you clearly that if markets were the answer, the agriculture sector would have done phenomenally, or let's say would have performed phenomenally in a I would call it a better space, or in a better position, but it didn't happen. So it means clearly that the reforms, so-called reforms in agriculture, haven't helped the farming community. And not only in India, if you look at America, since that the 1930s, the Great Depression years, after that, America had begun to provide subsidies to agriculture on a 5-year period basis. It is called as Farm Bill. America brings in, brings out, and this farm bill looks into what the subsidies for agriculture plus investment should be for the next 5 years. Now, for several decades, this has been happening quite regularly, and with the kind of support that was getting into American agriculture, I think everyone would say that the American agriculture was, should have been more profitable or more prosperous. and the world should be driving a lesson from it. But on the contrary, what people don't know is that although the number of people in American agriculture have come down to just 1.5% of the population, and that is what economists tell us. Economists tell us that the more the reduction in the population in agriculture, the higher will be economic growth. And so in India, for instance, we say 50% population is involved in agriculture. So again, the argument is that we should reduce that number. This is a burden. So let's bring this burden to the cities. I remember
they are unproductive.
Yes, a former governor of the Reserve Bank of India used to say that the biggest reform would be when we move people out of agriculture into the urban centers, because urban centers need cheap labor. And I have always stood up and said, if the Hari Mazdoor is what you consider as employment generation, I think the entire economic needs to be relooked at. And so this is what happened in America. In America, interestingly, if you see, in 2020, before Trump went to the election mode, the American farmers had carried a bankruptcy of $425 billion. And this is after 5 years, every 5 years, huge subsidy amount being pumped in the American agriculture. So it clearly tells you that even in America, the mecca for reforms, market reforms in agriculture, farmers were always, suffered the consequences. I remember, Kshitij, sometimes back during the protest, an American farmer talking to me, and he said, wanted to know what is happening in India, why the farmers are protesting. And when I explained to him, he said, well, I have been, when I was born, I was born in indebtedness, and I know when I go off, I will again be, I would be in debt. And he said, if you really want to know what narak is, or what the hell is, then I think if you only pray that you are not born as a farmer, which means if you are a farmer, that is the hell, is before you. So the point I'm trying to make is, if this is the situation in the rich developed countries, I think India, of course, has been struggling all these years. And the farmers' demand has to be seen in that particular light, and then see how to provide farmers with an assured and a viable income is what at least I have been struggling all these years.
So do you think something like a universal basic income or something like that, in addition to MSP and stuff like that, will?
When I first talked about direct income support for farmers, there was a kind of uproar, and many economists thought I didn't understand economics, and some of them scoffed at me and said, how in a market era you can be talking about transferring income from that government resource to the farmers, and not practical, and so on. But looking at what is happening globally, I thought it is important to enlighten these people and come out with what is happening in one country or the other. And subsequently, if you remember, in 2018, the government went in for PM Kisan Nidhi program scheme, under which 6,000 rupees per year is given as a subsidy support or direct income support to farmers. Now it means only 500 rupees per month, which is very low. But I thought it was a tectonic shift. It may be 500 rupees today. One day it will become 5,000. In fact, if the farmers are able to organize themselves and build up more pressure, I'm sure it will be 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 also, because this is how we have actually played against farmers over the decades. We have denied them the rightful income. They deserve to be compensated for what the consequences they have suffered all these years. And I think it is very important that farmers everywhere in the world, and to your earlier question, as to where do I see the future, I think the demand of Indian farmers saying that MSP should be made a legal right, which means no trading taking place below the benchmark price that the government has fixed for 23 crops, I think is the way forward. And that is what the world needs to pick up now. If India adopts that pattern or goes by the demand of the farmers, I'm sure every country, farmers everywhere else in the world would also be demanding a kind of what in American language they call it as income parity. In India, we call it guaranteed income. They call it income parity. I think the world needs to move towards income parity for farmers.
Okay. You mentioned that the whole idea that the agriculture sector has to be deliberately impoverished so that people leave that sector in distress, flock to the cities, and work for extremely low income. The interesting thing in the last few years, and as I'm sure you'll know, is that even the income generation in the non-agricultural sector has been so abysmal. It has been so bad that those jobs what are people going to flee to? So in that context, what kind of employment trends do you see? Like as we saw during the lockdown, people fleeing the cities and going back into the villages and working on their whatever land they had.
I think this is very important to understand what you are trying to arrive at. I remember it was the year was 1996, and I happened to be at a conference at the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation in Chennai. The then Vice President of Sustainable Development of World Bank, a gentleman called Dr. Ismail Saragaldin, and a dear friend of mine, had in that conference in his presentation said that the number of people who are going to migrate from the rural to the urban areas in India in the next 20 years, which means by the year 2015, their number would be equal to twice the combined population of UK, France, and Germany. The combined population of UK, France, and Germany is 200 million. So the World Bank had anticipated that 400 million people would be migrating from the rural to the urban areas in India by the year 2015. Now, it tells you clearly that that was a roadmap before us. And it wasn't a kind of that they were warning us or they were, sounding an alert. It was basically a directive that we must do it. And our economists, the mainline economists, have been true to that job and have been blindly, and that's why I call them lazy economists, cut and paste and then suggest to India that is the way forward for you. And I had even at that time called these people who are being moved out because if you keep agriculture deliberately impoverished, people would abandon and come into the cities looking for a menial job. And I had called them agriculture refugees. So these 400 million people were actually the agriculture refugees being driven out of rural areas into the urban centers. Now, interestingly, when the lockdown happened, we saw at least 100 million going back into their villages, walking for days together along with their families. We all have that video image before us. And this clearly showed that these agriculture refugees, just 2 days of their livelihood being snapped because of that lockdown, walked back, preferred to go back into their villages. Now, this is something which tells us that just blindly following the prescription that the Western economists or the Western universities or the financial institutions, including World Bank and IMF, suggest to you is not the way forward for India. I don't think we have to cut and paste, without realizing what it means for a country like us. I thought this is an opportunity, historic opportunity after the reverse migration that we witnessed in India. I think it was very crucial to understand that what India needs is not to move people out of villages into the cities. What we need to do is to make agriculture economically viable and profitable. Once you do that, if agriculture is sustainable, if agriculture is viable, why would a person move out of the village and become a rickshaw driver in the cities? So I think, or become a guard in front of standing in front of a big house or an industry, in urban India.
We obviously, the 2020 2021 farmers protests were like one of the largest in recent years. But while I was also researching on this and for a few videos that I made on agriculture and stuff, I was there was this in the period of the early 90s. I was very young. I was just 3-4 years old. But I once I read about the Dunkel protests, that seemed like a very interesting period. Where there was the KRLS that was working in Karnataka and South India, BKU, Mr. Rakesh Tiket's father, he was working like this entire nationwide sort of protest and opposition against the Dunkel draft and the WTO, and that we are not going to let this happen. That's a very fascinating time for me. I'm guessing you were there and you were around it. What was that time like? What were the hopes and what were the aspirations and what was it like? That period?
Well, I think the emergence of Dunkel draft, as we used to call it at that time, Dunkel was one of those heads of the G8TT, it was called, and GATT. And then it was that draft which was being circulated. And the interesting part is not only in India but globally also, if we see, there was a kind of a movement that stood up and that emerged, and farmers took lead. Whether it was the Karnataka Rajya Sangha that you talked about, or the BKU, the Elder Tikayat, and there Mr. Professor Nanjada Swami was leading that movement in Karnataka. And I think many of us were part of these campaigns. And over the years, we built up a kind of a argument, or based on the analysis of reading the, or through the drafts and all these things. And I think that did tell the world that what is being proposed from these trade negotiations is not going to benefit the farmers. And in my work also on WTO, during that time and subsequently, we have shown very clearly. I remember I did a study on the first 10 years of the agreement on agriculture. And in that study, I had brought it out that out of the third world countries, that we have, 105 countries had already become food importing countries. And the gainers were the, both the blocks on either side of the Atlantic Ocean. They were the gainers. And, the Keynes group that we call food exporting countries and so on. So basically it was building up, the trade was being used to build up the same kind of a structure that we talked in the beginning, where the big giants emerged. The big agri corporation were to take over agriculture, and obviously they're pushing farmers out. And this is what happened in North America. This is what happened in European Union, and now the entire effort was to move people out of farming from Asia and from Africa also. So the design was laid out. Again, as I repeatedly, I always emphasize on this point of economic design. So trade was, a part of the design of pushing people out of rural areas into the urban centers, making going for globally competitive supply chains, which means they could produce cheaper food for you. Nobody is questioning what price they are paying to the farmers, but we all, if you're into economics, we all love quoting this term. Oh, they are globally competitive. Not knowing what has happened to the farmers who produce that food. I think that is a bigger challenge. And from that negotiations and the protests that followed, at least one thing is clear: because of the global effort to oppose, people felt so outraged or so concerned, I would say, at what was likely to happen from the way WTO was agreement on agriculture was being designed. And I'm sure you will agree that we have seen the negative consequences in so many years now. And also at the same time, it was because of this combined effort that the agreement on agriculture is still not finalized. We know that WTO still keeps on discussing from, a development stage to Doha development round to this round and so on and so forth. And so I think the point I'm trying to make is today, after the war, there is, not much interest left in the process of globalization. That is why we see international effort being, let's hold on to globalization. That's very important, and so on and so forth. But I think most important part, in my understanding, would be that how can we feed this world? Actually, we should, instead of having a multilateral agreement on international trade, I've always said what we need is a multilateral agreement to address hunger, to fight hunger. That is one. And secondly, there has to be a multilateral agreement to see that farming or agriculture or the farmers become economically viable